Ben, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
So you're currently writing a thesis about decarbonising Australia.
Yes.
How are you going about that?
Well, having fairly rigorous supervisors, they're asking me to build a strong foundation for that argument, and that has begun with a review of the literature relating to Australia's current energy supply and how it operates. And we focus there on the fact that our state, South Australia, has incorporated a high proportion of variable renewable energy already, so there are some lessons there. And the second stage has been to review all of the global literature on 100% renewables studies, so as to understand and build the case for why it really is important to have an inclusion of nuclear in those decarbonisation pathways. From there, we'll be doing some modelling about optimising solutions for the Australian energy system, and hopefully taking into account a broad range of potential electricity demand, so that we can find a pathway that offers high certainty for a challenge that's very, very important in the near term.
So what are your findings thus far?
In South Australia, we've successfully incorporated quite a lot of variable renewable energy. Sometimes, on average, we get about 30% of our electricity from wind power. And on some given days, we can get nearly all of our electricity from wind power. But that's largely because we're a small part of a network joined to a very much larger part of a network. And it's really in that grid entirety that we need to think about these issues. And once penetrations of variable renewable energy reach a certain point, they cease to become cheap to add, and it starts to become very much more challenging. And that's where it's really important that we need to blend all of our clean energy technology options to find the right mix and the right result. And when we have addressed the 100% renewables literature, it paints really troubling signposts, both in the fact that it probably can't be done, and could it be done, there would be serious sustainability consequences from a very high dependence on hydroelectricity and a very high dependence on biomass in particular. And ultimately, we think the costs would be much more than liberal democratic nations will ever bear, and we need to find better, blended, lower cost, higher certainty pathways for decarbonisation.
How did you converge on nuclear as an addition to that energy mix?
Well, for myself, I spent a number of years, most of my life in fact, not supporting nuclear energy really very much at all. And I went through a process of becoming an environmental and sustainability professional. And it was really in the course of leaving the realm of study and entering the realm of work, and needing to deliver projects in climate change where simply the gap between the scale of the problem and the capabilities of a certain set of solutions became amazingly apparent. And that led me probably through a little dark period, you might say, of not really feeling like we had very good options available to us at all to tackle climate change. And that was pretty concerning. And I guess I turned my head back toward nuclear power, stopped having opinions, and instead just started listening, and then started progressively researching and learning and trying to establish whether what I had thought for a long time was actually correct. And what I found was remarkably different. And that being the case, it actually restored a lot of hope for me that there are solutions and there are pathways that can work, and that we can create a planet that's got plentiful clean energy for a lot of people. And that's the solution we need. If a solution set doesn't fit where we're going to be in 2050, which is about 10 billion people, all of whom are seeking high living standards, many of whom are being born into situations today where electricity barely even exists. If a solution doesn't scale to that sort of world, it's not a solution. Nuclear offers a situation that can scale to that sort of world and draw down our impacts on the natural world at the same time. That's tremendously exciting. So to have a pathway that restores that optimism and I can see numerically and practically can work, that's pretty good.
Were your misconceptions due to a lack of information, or do you think it's a public policy issue?
Well, I think you could say that I came up in a fairly typical sense, probably being indoctrinated without necessarily realising I was, which is perhaps the nature of indoctrination. I was a supporter and member of mainstream environmental organisations, had an upbringing that was probably more to the left of politics than the right, and almost simply as a criteria of identity, anti-nuclear seems to just fit into that package of who one is. And you can go a long way without really ever steadily questioning that. So I think I inherited a lot of concepts that had been prevalent for a very long time for lots of people, and they get handed down. One in particular I can remember speaking about to my older brother, actually, and telling him how wrong he is, was that, oh no, nuclear is not actually clean. There's all the emissions in the supply chain from mining and milling, and then you've got to transport it, and then you've got to do that. Now, I was just repeating something I'd read. I didn't understand it. I hadn't looked at it, I hadn't learned about it, but these things get perpetuated. So I think it's just something that gets handed down really, really readily for something that people feel comfortable about taking on. And something that helped me to change was to be able to find other people that I really respected on other issues who thought differently on that one. And really that provides a bit of a bridge, a bit of a values bridge for people to potentially change their position on an issue. And certainly that's something I now try to provide for other people who are really concerned about climate change, really want more biodiversity in the world, really want justice in energy, to think that actually nuclear can be, in fact, is entirely consistent with those values, and in fact probably provides the best pathway to that outcome. So yeah, values really was a critical part of making that transition.
Do you think education will generate a sea change in attitudes towards nuclear energy?
Oh, we need the information, absolutely. But my experience has been that evidence can bounce right off if people haven't yet decided that they're going to give you an opportunity and listen to you. And you need to establish a relationship based on common values first. And if you can do that, you can do a lot. And I would say that in the early days where I was speaking to groups, I probably had the first 30 seconds really to convince an unconvinced audience that they would at least listen to my argument. And that's all about values. That's all about saying, I'm like you, I'm concerned about the things you're concerned about, so I'd like you to hear how I've thought this through. And once that opening has been established, and once that a little bit of relationship has been established, evidence is crucial. So I wouldn't want to say that evidence, information and education doesn't matter. It absolutely does. However, if we take that approach to the exclusion of actually making nuclear likeable, for example, it can fail. It's known as the deficit model of communication. People are empty vessels that needed to be filled with information, fill them with the right information, and they'll come up with the conclusion that you want. It's not correct. That information is crucial, but you need to have people ready, willing to take it on board first of all. That's about establishing common values.
One of our films is about exactly that, the fact that the deficit model doesn't work.
Really?
Yes.
Well, there's a wonderful, another way of formalising some things I've saying, which is to hold up two characteristics that are very important: warmth and competence. And they both matter. But warmth pretty much eats competence for breakfast. And unless you're warm and likeable and someone that people want to spend time with, your competence really doesn't matter. You can be the most competent nuclear person in the world, but if you come across the wrong way, or you're rude or arrogant or whatever, forget it. It's not going to work. Warmth has to come first, which is why in nuclear we need people to actually respect communication as a skill set in its own right, and one that has a basis of research, one that has evidence that's as good as or more reliable than evidence in other disciplines, and that needs to be respected and used much more proactively. And I see some great signs from various nuclear parties. I think things are changing. I think they're starting to get it, but there's still a long way to go.
So what do you think the future holds?
I really would like to see, and what I hope the future holds, is more of a coalition approach between clean energy sources, realising that they've got a common future that works for everyone. And that's both within nuclear itself and nuclear technologies and other renewable technologies. There's a huge piece of energy pie out there called coal, right, that can belong to a whole lot of other energy sources, and they will succeed better together. And in the Australian setting, for example, we can argue much, much deeper clean energy targets if we work together. We get much tighter, smaller energy targets when we just focus on these variable renewable energy technologies, because they have limitations. But if you compare them with other technologies, then you can have great results. And that requires a little bit of mutual respect and a little bit of guns down between energy technologies, so that they can find common ground and understand how they can work together to establish that. Same goes to within nuclear. I think that my observation of working within the nuclear setting is understanding more firmly that they succeed and fail together. That needs to be more and more and more prominent. And they need to use a fine-tooth comb to identify every bit of common ground that they have and put out messaging about the fact that their current trajectories, all their modelling about where nuclear is going, none of it's good enough. Right? It should be double that, and then it should be double again, because that's what a firm climate change response requires. And as a competitive enterprise, I would hope that they're going out to think about how do we double that, how do we double that again? You know, all of that coal is ours by right. They've really got to think a lot more, frankly, a lot more competitively about their place in the energy mix and fill the messaging cup with positive messaging about nuclear. I think we heard some really sensible things from Malcolm Grimston at this conference about the fact that this obsessive focus on safety can backfire. And safety should just be a core principle that everyone confidently assumed is the case, as is the case in airlines. And the messaging about nuclear needs to become about what it offers, the positive it offers, not the negative it's avoiding. If we can do those things, the future for nuclear can be very much more exciting than people realise right now.
Ben, thank you for joining us.
That's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.